The snafus are the funny part of history. So that sort of became the organizing principle for the podcast. I wouldn't say that before that, like I had a preoccupation with snafus or with disasters any more than the average person. But the average person has a lot of preoccupation with disasters.
Absolutely.
We love true crime. We love reading about the Titanic. We love all these things. They're like the car crashes on the freeway that you can't turn away from.
Hello. How's it going? Thank you. Thank you. My name's Casey Newton. I'm the founder and editor of Platformer, and I co-host Hard Fork, a podcast with the New York Times. Oh, we have some listeners. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ed Helms. Ed is an actor, comedian, and author of the new book, Snafu, The Definitive Guide to History's Greatest Screw-Ups. When he is not acting or producing projects through his company, Pacific Electric Picture Co., he is busy hosting the popular Snafu podcast, which is now in its third season. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ed Helms. There he is.
Hello.
All right.
Keep it going for Casey Newton, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm really excited to be here and to chat with you, Ed. Just to give these folks a little behind the scenes, Ed actually came on our podcast, Hard Fork, and so we're going to put that out in a couple weeks and hope you can listen to that because we get into all sorts of stuff we might not have time for tonight. But tonight I want to talk to you about Snafu, a book I really loved reading, and it came out of the Snafu podcast, which also covers historical disasters. So Ed, where did this fixation on failures start?
It's just been my life. It's my entire life. So as you know, there are lots of podcasts out there. I'm a big fan of podcasts. A few years ago, I found myself consuming tons of podcasts and was like, where do I fit into this? Do I fit into it? And I've always loved history. I've always just loved kind of going down little research rabbit holes just for fun. And so I thought, okay, history feels like a good fit. And then I wanted it to be funny. And then I was like, well, what part of history is funny? The screw-ups.
Right.
Like the snafus are the funny part of history. So that sort of became the organizing principle for the podcast. I wouldn't say that before that, like I had a preoccupation with snafus or with disasters any more than the average person. But the average person has a lot of preoccupation with disasters.
Absolutely.
We love true crime. We love reading about the Titanic. We love all these things. They're like the car crashes on the freeway that you can't turn away from.
Absolutely. Listening to your podcast, I had the thought that it was like, this podcast answers the question, what if true crime were funny? You know, like I mean, in some cases you are actually talking about crimes, but you're investing it with a lot of humor. So far, you guys have covered Cold War era military exercises, the theft of J. Edgar Hoover's files, and most recently, Prohibition. How does a failure rise to the level of a snafu that like you want to spend a podcast season doing?
That's a great question, and it applies to the book also. So the criteria is really two things. Number one, I want to tell stories that have sort of faded from the popular memory, the things that people don't really necessarily know a lot about. And if they do, then I'm going to tell you something that you don't know about it. So for example, Prohibition is the subject of season 3. Everybody knows that during Prohibition, we made alcohol illegal. A bunch of gangsters shot everybody, and that was it was a big mistake. But what you probably didn't know is that the government also, in its effort to deter people from drinking, added poison to the industrial alcohol supply, knowing that bootleggers would then bring that to the consumers and they would drink it, and thousands of people died at the hands of the United States government. during Prohibition. So that we tell that whole story in exhaustive detail in the podcast. And so that's just to say that's kind of the main criteria, is that it's not something known. Like, I'm not going to do World War II or, the Holocaust or something. It's like, I'm going to try to tell you things that are maybe a little off the beaten path. Also, ideally, it's something that can that can handle some comedy topspin well.
Yes.
And season 2 of the podcast is actually an incredibly rich and poignant story with a lot of gravitas, but it lent itself to just kind of like warm humor also.
Yeah.
That all applies to the book as well. The biggest difference here is that each season of the podcast is like, like I said, an exhaustive deep dive. So the whole season is one thing. In the book, there's 31 chapters that are all different snafus, divided up by decades.
Yeah. At what point did you start thinking, I want to actually make a book about all of this research that I've been doing?
Well, there were a lot of things that our team stumbled on in the sort of evaluation process while we're just kind of gathering up ideas or in the early stages of planning a season. You're kind of going through things and you're like, well, this would be good, or this would not be good, or this is like great, but there's not enough there. And so it gets kind of kicked aside. But then it was like, there's just so much stuff here. I got to write a book.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious what that process was like for you. I first encountered you on The Daily Show, where I became a huge fan. And then, of course, like I imagine a lot of people here, I love watching you on The Office and then The Hangover. Any fans of Ed's who happen to see anything? Okay, great. And I look at what you do in like The Daily Show or on The Office, and I think that looks like the most fun job in the world. When you tell me I wrote a book, I say that sounds like a huge pain in the ass. I don't want to do that. So what was wouldn't you have had so much more fun just not writing the book?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I didn't. Again, the book just felt so organic coming out of the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'd never written a book before, but it was like, I think I can do this. We have this great team, great researchers. So like the material's going to be there. And then I just got to write funny words, which is something I've been doing for 25 years. But yes, like it's a different kind of fun. And I will say, like, the fun of making a TV show or a movie is so overt. It's so it's so immediate. Like being on a set and collaborating with brilliant people and making each other laugh, or just even the creative process of chasing a joke down, which can take hours of like going crazy. But I love all of that, and it's so fun. And then, of course, laughter is such an immediate, whether you're making an audience laugh or a crew on a film set, it's like immediate payback. This was like slow burn fun, like the research is fun as long as you're reading great stuff, but half the stuff you read in research is like, that eye roll stuff, like this is useless, turn the page, this is not helpful. You're getting through tons of stuff just to get the good stuff. But then there's a real deep level of gratification that's very different. Like I am so proud of my TV and movie work. I'm insanely proud of this and the podcast in a really different way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To me, the best reason to write a book is that it can never disappear because a streaming service didn't want to pay for it anymore. It's like this will like always exist. You can always put it in your hands.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few stories from the book. So before I read Snafu, I did not know that there was once a plan to shoot a nuclear weapon at the moon. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes. All right, 1950s. It's the Cold War. This was not a great time for decision making. So we're in this standoff with the Soviet Union, and America really wants to flex its nuclear muscle. So they hatched this idea to shoot a nuclear warhead at the moon. Now, why is this a good idea? Because, well, it turns out...
Anybody know? Okay. Not seeing any hands go up.
Well, the thinking was, and this is literally the thinking of like a 10-year-old, the thinking is like, if the Soviets see us hit the moon with a nuclear warhead, they'll be terrified. And they'll just be like, oh my God, we're losing the Cold War. After exhaustive planning and research and investigation, they came to the startling conclusion that this was not a good idea, in part because any minor miscalculation or malfunction could easily result in the warhead just slingshotting around the gravitational field of the moon and landing right here on top of us again, which is obviously terrible. But even if it worked, and this I love, even if it worked, they figured that it wouldn't be as awe-inspiring as they had hoped. It wouldn't have that shock and awe effect because it would probably result in just a little poof, like a little dust cloud on the surface of the moon. You'd probably need a telescope even to see it or register it. And I love that detail because that is Wile E. Coyote. Like that's literally every time Wile E. Coyote falls off a cliff, he's like poof, like that little dust cloud. And it's Looney Tunes. That's a Looney Tunes. Like I'm sure Acme, the company Acme consulted on this.
It truly is the most Looney Tunes story. I was reading it wondering like if they got that message back, it's like, oh no, it'll only create a tiny little puff, and was like, we have to go bigger, like we have to develop a bomb that can destroy the moon, you know?
Yes.
Well, maybe next Cold War.
Yeah.
I feel like a recurring theme in the book is that a lot of snafus come out of people trying to invent new technologies. Like super interesting to me as a person who writes about technology. One of my favorite examples in the book is Acoustic Kitty. What was Acoustic Kitty?
So again, it's the Cold War. The CIA is trying to figure out new and creative ways for spying, for espionage. One of the, again, you have to, like a lot of this stuff feels like a comedy writer's room came up with it, and this is in that category. So they hatched this plan to surgically implant microphones into a cat's ears, because cats. Oh my gosh, was that a dog? The dog loves this idea. He's like, yes.
Wait, how did you get the dog to do that just now?
He just loves this story, I guess. Was that actually a dog? Oh, fabulous. Only in Palo Alto.
Only in
That's
Palo
so
Alto.
Tech and pets. That's so why would you put a microphone in a cat's ears? Well, they do have insane hearing because their ears have a special kind of anatomy where they have that cup shape and they're directional, and so they are incredible at hearing. Then I guess the plan was to train the cats to run up and sit next to bad guys, and then so you could just hear what the bad guys are saying. After a lot of time, money, research, and very sadly some mistreated cats, they realized that you can't train cats. Like that was it took all of that to realize that you can't train cats.
Right. Dogs, on the other hand, can be trained, and I'm wondering. Well, never mind.
That might be a spy spying on us.
You have to wonder.
Yeah.
One of your rival podcasts gathering intel, maybe. So those were a couple of my favorites from the book. I'm curious, there's a lot of very funny, interesting screw-ups in here. I'm curious if there was one in there that for you were just like, oh my gosh, yes, I cannot wait to write this story that I'm learning about.
Yes, they're honestly they're all my babies, so I love them all. But one I love. It has a little bit of a Hollywood connection, and this one's called Project Azorian. It's 1968, and a nuclear sub sinks. A Soviet nuclear sub sinks in the North Pacific, and the Soviets have no idea where it is, but we know exactly where it is. Our intel, we know exactly where the sub is, so of course we want to go get this thing. It's going to be a treasure trove of intel. We'll learn, code breaking. We'll also retrieve their warheads. We'll retrieve their nuclear technology, so a plan is hatched, which is essentially to build a giant ship with one of those arcade game claws that can be lowered 2 miles deep into the bottom of the ocean, grab the sub, and then winch it back up. Now, this is not a subtle endeavor. It's a very huge project. So in order to pull that off, the CIA needs a cover story because you can't do something that big undercover. So they go to Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes, the crazy, neurotic film producer who's now living in a penthouse, living as basically a recluse in a penthouse in Las Vegas. And they're like, Howard, you're our guy. Will you put out a press release that you're all of a sudden excited about deep sea mineral mining and that you're building this ship for that purpose? And he's like, I love it. Count me in. And it is exactly like the kind of stuff that he was into. So he puts out this press release. The CIA goes off and starts to build this massive ship. It's called the Glomar Explorer, which we'll come back to. So the ship gets built. They send it out, and they lower this claw. And they grab the sub, which is kind of a technical marvel. It's now 1974, I believe. And they finish the boat and they get out there. They grab a piece of the sub, they pull it up, but they start to hoist it and it breaks. And they lose like most of the sub, but they still get a big chunk. And they get a lot of really valuable intel, but they don't get all of it. And so they're kind of psyched, but disappointed and frustrated. And they're like, we're going back. And the accountants at the CIA are like, okay, this has already cost like $200 million. Are you serious? Like, you're going to go back? And they did. They planned another expedition, and they get out there, and they managed to get more. And but it's still, the debate rages whether or not this was worth it, and the consensus is absolutely not. Like, it cost an unbelievable amount of money. The only reason we know about all of this is because burglars broke into Howard Hughes' office in Hollywood, stole a bunch of cool stuff like his butterfly collection and other stuff, and a bunch of files. Somehow those files made it to the press, and it was the files on Project Azorian. So the press starts asking the CIA, what's up with this big ship, the Glomar Explorer, and Howard Hughes? And this is the origin of the phrase, we can neither confirm nor deny that happened. And that response is now known as the Glomar response.
Wow.
Which is kind of a cool detail.
That is a very cool detail. I have to say, I would think that most of the money you would spend on like building the whole thing, and it shouldn't cost that much to just drop it down one more time. But that's how those carnival games get you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing, it costs like 75 cents to get the, no.
So, some of us may feel like we may be going through a snafu in America right now, maybe multiple branching interrelated snafus.
A tapestry, a matrix snafus,
Yes,
if you will.
a mural of snafus. Are there any lessons from the past in your coverage of snafus that gives you hope for the future?
Well, hope is tricky. I wouldn't go that far. I'm not there yet. But I do think that the study of snafus it can be very sort of it can be very like literally instructive for moments, but it also kind of from a higher altitude, it does show us. I just love that everything in this book, like we got through.
Yeah.
Somebody got through. Some group of whoever was caught up in this thing, like it did. The world moved on, and we got to some semblance of equilibrium again. I don't want to be glib or Pollyannish about the moment that we're in, but I do think that there's some hope to be drawn from just that recollection, like that there can be light at the end of the tunnel.
And also maybe that we're just always romanticizing the past and we feel like things are worse now than they've ever been.
Yes.
It's the worst they've ever been for
Yes.
us. But I feel like, you know, part of what your book shows is that this country, which, you know, many of us love quite a lot, has been just sort of screwing up forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I talk about season 2 of the podcast?
I was just about to ask.
Oh, good, because this feels. Season 2 of the podcast, we started working on like 2 years ago, so that was before really this new moment that we're in politically, and I mean culturally we were already in a tricky time, but season 2 of the podcast has become very prescient all of a sudden, and it's an incredible story. So in 1971 in Philadelphia. You may know that Philadelphia at that time doesn't really have this reputation now, but at that time was incredibly active politically. So to all like civil rights activists, anti-Vietnam War activists, Philadelphia was a hotbed. Now, a lot of activists in Philadelphia were feeling like they were getting kind of roughed up by the FBI. They were being illegally surveilled, they were being harassed, and not for any crimes, and not even for any suspicion of crimes, simply because they were clearly political enemies of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI at the time. So they have nowhere to turn. You can't go to the FBI and say, will you investigate yourself? Because they won't do that. So they hatched this very elaborate plan to break into a local FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and steal files because they feel this is their last recourse. It's the only way they can prove that they're up to no good, that the FBI is off its rocker. It's not following the law. They do this at phenomenal risk to themselves, to their families, and they're successful. They steal all the files from this office. They pour through them. They discover documented evidence of crimes that the FBI is committing, basically just trouncing on civil liberties. Mm-hmm. And they make these packets. They send them to various newspapers. They send them to lots of Congress people, senators, and everyone chickens out. They send them right back to the FBI. They're like, I don't want to touch this, except for one reporter at the Washington Post named Betty Metzger, who was a young reporter. She took it to the Washington Post brass, Ben Bradley, and they decided we're going to run with this. We're going to go with this. And the administration was shouting at them, you're breaking the law. You can't do this. They said, look, we're doing that. We're publishing this. They publish these. They start to report on these things, and they're getting more and more files as time goes on, and it's a moment. It sort of is a hot moment. It fades a little bit, but as the sort of tension builds, they realize that there is so much here. Eventually, Frank Church, who was a senator from Idaho at the time, launches the Church investigation, which is the first congressional investigation into an intelligence agency. It's where COINTELPRO is uncovered, which was basically the entire operation that that all of this stuff was under. And it topples Hoover's legacy. He died right before the church hearings, but it's the only reason we know about all of the horrible malfeasance that he was up to. In season 2 of the podcast, Betty Metzger participated with us. The burglars who are still with us, they all participated. And it was incredibly moving. And again, it's funny. Like, we do have some cheeky fun, but it's all very warm and at times very heavy and poignant. And it's the only reason that now we have any oversight over those, the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI, which is now, obviously, we're in a moment where that feels like it might not be the case much longer. And the FBI is in the hands of someone that feels incredibly political, much like J. Edgar Hoover was. But to your point, like, this is evidence that we've been there before. And as scared as people might feel in this moment, people at an earlier time felt just as scared, and felt so scared, in fact, that they broke into the FBI. And with some courage and tenacity, they moved through that moment.
There's a lot of fighting back in the book, and I do think that's a good thing about human nature, and maybe even our country, is that when people see wrongdoing, they often do say something, and they fight for a better outcome.
Yeah.
It also seems like a recurring theme in the book is that to set something right, someone is going to need to steal some documents. Howard Hughes, J. Edgar Hoover,
By the way, the only reason we know about the shooting the warhead at the moon is because Carl Sagan was part of that project. A young Carl Sagan, right out of grad school, and one of his biographers, decades later, was going through his papers and found an old fellowship application on which he had listed this project. And the researcher was like, "Oh, hold on, Carl, I'm getting into this." And that writer doggedly dug into it, and that's the only reason we know about that whole nuclear escapade.
Yeah, it just goes to show you one of my favorite maxims, which is that journalists are some of the greatest people in the world. That's very, not me, but like the other ones, are great.
It's true. It is absolutely true.
All right, that's beautifully said. Let's maybe lighten the mood a bit. Ed, can you tell us about a snafu that you either witnessed or were responsible for on the set of a film or TV show?
So many snafus in the film and TV world. One that one that comes to mind was on the set of Hangover 2, which we shot in Thailand. We were in Bangkok for a couple of months, and I'll never forget this. So we're shooting this scene where we're on a boat, and it's a speedboat, and we're zooming up and down the Chao Phraya River, which is the main artery, the river up through the city of Bangkok, and it's very dense. There's traffic, there's boat traffic, and the river narrows and widens, and it's just kind of fraught. But we're zooming through it like 50 miles an hour. It's super fun. It's like a little terrifying, but it's super fun. Now, we're being filmed by a helicopter, and the stunt driver of the boat is actually underneath in the cabin of the boat, and he's looking at monitors because they've mounted cameras on the front of the boat that you can't see. And so he's driving, basically looking at these monitors. And like I said, we're going fast, and we're like weaving around. And
you're in the boat. You don't have a stunt double.
Yeah, we're Zach and Bradley and I are all standing in the boat, just like pretending like we're driving. I think Bradley's hands are on the wheel, but we're all just like holding on for dear life. And there's a helicopter with the camera on it zooming over us, like these really close shots, also going like that helicopter's going like 100 miles an hour. And it's terrifying, but it's so fun. It's such a thrill. Like, who gets to zoom through the Bangkok on a boat like that? Okay, so we stop at one point, and we're kind of resetting, like figuring out the next move. And the stunt driver comes out of the kind of cabin of the boat, and he's like over on the back of the boat talking on the radio to his guy, and he's like, Jerry, I can't see down there. And we're like, hold on. And then they're like, all right, picture up. Here we go again. And we're like, did you just say that you can't see down there? And he's like, oh yeah, but it's fine. It's all good. And he goes back down there. We do a few more shots. That night, Zach took a Snickers bar and mashed it into a pair of tidy whities and had it delivered to the helicopter pilot. Just said, thanks for scaring the out of us. But yeah.
I'm curious, like, it strikes me that when you are an actor, like the risk of failure must feel not only ever present, but it's so surrounded by other people who are watching you in real time, right? I'm a writer, or like I make a podcast which happens in a room with two people. I'm failing all the time, but nobody is like looking at me doing it.
Sure.
How do you deal with the potential of flubbing a line, ruining the $1 million shot on the boat ride in Thailand? How do you process that?
Well, Casey, we're failing all the time too.
Yeah.
We're botching takes, we're forgetting lines. That's all the stuff you don't see. And yes, sometimes the stakes are super high. Like if it's a giant stunt, an elaborate thing where a lot of stuff is going to blow up, and you have like 5 lines, and you better get them right. You better time it off of the cues perfectly. And even that gets messed up sometimes. But that's what the production process is. That's literally why it takes 3 months to make a movie. We fail all the time. The really hard part is live performance, like stand-up comedy or improv comedy or live sketch comedy. Those are the moments where where the training process for that is, again, you fail all the time.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about live performance is that you generally don't rise to a point where the stakes are really high until you've paid so many dues that you're far less likely to make a mistake in that setting.
Yeah.
But there's so much failure. There's so many snafus. There's so much egg on our faces, like throughout the process. And I will say, like, especially in comedy, like on the set of The Office, on the set of The Hangover, you have to fail a lot because you have to try things.
Yeah.
And you have to like experiment. And on The Office, there was a lot of improv, so you're trying to throw your cast off. You're trying to like throw curveballs and just have fun. And half the time it doesn't work.
Right.
So that's the part that you don't see.
But it sounds like maybe if you're not failing, then maybe you're not trying hard enough in the thing that you're doing. That some risk is required to make something really compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective.
Yeah. I do improv in my hobby, and like basically the first thing that they tell you in improv is that you should be excited every time that you fail because it will just make the scene better, which does weirdly turn out to be true.
Yeah. If you can stay positive.
Yeah.
And just move through it. That's always the case.
Like the classic is like in the first time someone comes into the scene, I call them Bob, and the next time they come onto the scene, I call them Andy, and then I'm like, Bob, Andy, and everyone laughs every time because they know that you screwed up, but you're somehow like folding it in.
Yeah, and you didn't let it like eat you or hurt your performance.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've been in those moments on stage where like something slips up, but you're like, I can use this and like fold it in somehow?
Yeah, well, I did improv comedy for years too, and I have a ton of those stories where the mistakes become the game of the scene, or they become. In fact, when there was a good run of my improv training where they said, don't do anything funny. just go with the first mistake. So like just start a scene. If it's a dinner scene, you're just eating dinner, you're starting a conversation about what, some family drama, but you're not trying to be funny. Eventually, like real quick, something weird will happen. Somebody's gonna trip up or say something silly or whatever by accident. That becomes the game, and that's what you can build on. That's like the seed or the yeast that like explodes. And I love that. I love that idea. I will say in stand-up comedy, it can be very hard to recover if you really lose a room. But again, that's what all those years of like low stakes, dingy comedy clubs or coffee shops or the basements of a deli or wherever you're doing these shows where no one cares and like it doesn't really matter.
What do you think the difference is there? Why is it easy to get an improv crowd back when you make a mistake, but harder with a stand-up room?
It's all on the performer. So it's. I don't think it's necessarily harder or easier. It's just how much failure training you've had. So like if you've learned that you're just gonna like take on every pitfall in it, like if in a stand-up set, for example. If you've failed enough that you can barrel through, you have a couple of bomb lines, a bomb line is just something you say in the event of a bad joke or the audience doesn't get something. You have your tools, like you've developed your kit, you've done the work. So I don't think it's harder or easier. It's the amount of hours you've put in.
Yeah.
And your commitment to like pushing through those moments.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Ed, we couldn't let you come to Silicon Valley without asking you about AI. You guys have all been waiting, right? Yeah. It strikes me that we are about to move into this world where we have new tools, AI tools, that will allow us to fix a lot of mistakes. Maybe in a way that means that you don't even need to do parts of your job that you used to do, right? So maybe in the near future, we can create a digital likeness of you that is so good that you don't have to get on the speedboat in Thailand anymore. And there doesn't even need to be a boat, right?
Great, but do I get the full salary?
I hope so.
Okay, good.
I hope so. But so this is sort of my question of like, as a creative person who like loved going on the boat ride, I guess my first question in this vein is sort of, are you encountering those moments already where people are saying, you know what, we don't actually need to even shoot that because we can just sort of do it digitally?
There's only one instance. Well, no, okay. Actually, now that I think about it, there are 3 instances where I have been digitally cloned and used. One was this meme recently of Office characters as babies. Did anybody see that? It's so cute and incredible. Like it really looks like all of us, but they're babies. And that was AI generated, and I just was like stunned at how adorable I was as Andy Bernard, the baby. It was, but no, the whole cast, it was so weird and surreal and lovable. There was another time I did this movie called Evan Almighty that Steve Carell starred in.
Yes.
And I had a small part in it. I was part of like sort of the Greek chorus of that movie. And there are all these big scenes on the ark. He builds an ark like Noah. And there are all these scenes, big sort of action storm water scenes. And they did a digital scan of some of the cast so that they could, because they were going to use, like we would be so small in the frame that they could actually like place us around the boat and like move us in primitive ways. But it looked fine because it was so small. And that I believe was used in that movie. The other time was very recently. I work with this organization called Represent Us that was trying to, that does a lot of anti-corruption work. And
let's just say we need that now more than ever.
Yeah, it's a great organization. And they were very, along with a lot of others, were very concerned about AI deepfakes affecting the election in 2024. And so they made a PSA, and they roped in a bunch of celebrities and basically did deep fakes of the celebrity, and then the reveal at the end was like that was not me. Beware of people you see telling you that your polling station is closed, or that you can vote in 2 days, or all this sort of misinformation that people were scared was going to get stirred up during the election. So they make this commercial, and they're like, Ed, we're going to use you. You're going to be in it. I'm like, great. What do I do? They're like, nothing. That's the whole point. We're going to do it. And I was like, cool, great. And then they send. I'm part of the sort of creative process of this commercial, like coming up with how it's going to look and feel, and then they're like, okay, here it is. But quick note, before you watch, you're not in it. And I'm like, what? Like, you didn't make the cut. Like, okay, all right. It was a PSA. It's not like I lost money on this. It's still good. I watch it. It's great. I'm like, what? So why am I not in it? And they're like, well, your deep fake didn't work. It didn't take. Like, it was not convincing. But Amy Schumer and Chris Rock and all these people, like, their deep fakes are in this thing. But maybe there's hope that I look glitchy as a deep fake.
Yeah, no algorithm can capture whatever is happening.
You can't capture
here.
this.
Yeah.
You can't capture this magic.
That's really interesting. What it makes me wonder is, like, is there a world where your agent comes to you and, like, it's this great script, but they're like, we don't actually need you to do the acting. Like, we just kind of need your likeness, and, like, here's the script, and we'll make, your synthesized voice say all of these things. Like, does that just, like, fill your, body with horror? Or is there part of you that's like, well, like, how much money are we talking here?
To be clear, that is not happening yet.
Yeah.
But it does feel imminent. I mean, they have basically created, fake versions of like James Earl Jones and Star Wars or whatever, or like his voice for Darth Vader. And I guess there's a certain, I feel a certain amount of surrender to that, because it feels so it feels like an unstoppable force in a way. Yeah. And I do love acting, and I would hope that I can always do it, but I would be like, I don't know, it feels like if it starts to become like the norm, then join the conversation.
You're open to it. You were telling me backstage that, like, a year or so ago, you were starting to get really concerned about some things you were seeing in AI. Do you want to share a little bit about what's been on your mind with AI?
I think particularly I got really rattled by, I have little kids, and so I got really rattled by the movie, what is the movie that Tristan made about social media? The Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma.
Does anyone know that movie?
Yeah.
Social Dilemma. I was really rattled by that movie, and then I started to follow Tristan Harris a lot, and I wound up meeting him at a conference, and I just loved his sort of the value system that he was bringing to the technology space, and the way that he was thinking, and really the way he was communicating about it. He had sort of pivoted off of, not that he'd let social media go, but he was just starting to focus a lot more on AI. So in following him, I kind of was getting more and more into that and aware of that, and feeling just a sense of dread about, I do work in a creative field, and so that feels very vulnerable to AI. In all the ways that you were just saying, both as an actor on screen, but also certainly in the writing process, and then and soon to be probably just in the entire genesis of a movie.
Yeah.
And so I also just, it's so hard to contemplate the future. And I'm now, since I have little kids, I'm so preoccupied with the future that, because I want them to live in a wonderful world, because they're the most wonderful, like, human beings ever. And so I've found myself in moving through moments of like intense anxiety about AI. And it's been tempered by, honestly, like, you and Kevin have done great work exploring some of the more optimistic sides of AI and some of the ways that it could solve some very deep and persistent problems that humanity has faced. But man, right now, given the bleakness of our sort of social and political landscape mixed with AI, it's a weird moment.
Yeah, you can definitely let your mind spiral and sort of go into some bad scenarios. But I mean, something smart that I think that you do is, you shared with me earlier that you use ChatGPT, and I do think that there is something demystifying about just actually engaging with the state of the art,
Yeah.
and saying, well, what can it do today? And okay, it's actually helpful for these couple of things. And I don't know, at least for me, that like brings some sense of balance to things.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's done anything like that for you?
I will say, like, sometimes ChatGPT is very fun and like it especially like in research. I use it mainly for like just general queries, and I find it pulls up just great information. It can organize information well. I've used it to summarize things so I can digest them quickly. If I have to get like a big document I need to read before a meeting, I'll get kind of like a quick take on it. So that stuff is fun, but it has raised, and it has demystified in a good way, but it's also raised a sort of deeper, another kind of fear, which is this notion that like, if AI can generate so much, especially like in the creative space, does that eliminate the value of creative expression for humans? Like, if you can just like consume exactly the music you want, if you can just sort of describe the music you want, and then it will be delivered to you perfectly, does that make the knowledge of how to make music and how to produce music, does that become obsolete? And that to me is very heartbreaking, and I feel like it will be very polarizing and divisive, and you'll have your purists who, like, in the decades to come will be like, I only play guitar, a real guitar, and they'll be like, that's, that they'll be like the musicians that play instruments, and then there'll be like all the AI musicians that just like describe a great song and then it comes out.
Right.
That's just music. It's in every space. Like, is there value to learning to paint if you can generate a better painting?
It's so interesting to me to hear you talking about these things. I ask myself some of these questions, but like, you have made some of the most beloved comedic pieces of entertainment of my entire life, and it resonates with this massive audience. And one reason why I think there will still be room for creativity is that what gives meaning to the work of the art is the fact that millions of people watch it and we watch it together. And there's sort of this like collective meaning that gets formed around it. Whereas if I just, type into Spotify, give me an album that sounds exactly like, Radiohead's OK Computer, but just make it different in some way, that's not going to mean anything to anybody. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and I hope that you're right, but we've already seen the devaluing of the collective experience. And I agree that the collective experience, the shared experience of entertainment products, of artistic and creative products, has for centuries been like a galvanizing and community building force, and something that's been incredibly powerful, and something certainly for a lot of our childhoods, I think, when you could go to school and just talk about the TV show that literally everybody saw, or the the sports event that literally everybody saw, and these were or the newscast that everybody saw, and these were shared experiences that we totally took for granted, and it's already fractured so dramatically, and we're finding people pretty happy to silo themselves into either information or creative spaces that are very that can be very isolating. And so I hope that you're right. I think that the shared experience, also, I mean, movie theaters is a great example. Like, movie theaters are, people keep saying, like, our community, the creative community in Hollywood is like, they're still going strong. Like, this is still important to culture. But the evidence is kind of pointing the other way.
Yeah. Well, why don't we look at the audience questions and see what's on their mind?
Let's do it.
How does that sound? That's great. Somebody wants to know, and this, shame on me, why wasn't this my first question? Can you talk about where the term snafu came from?
Oh, great question. Yes. So World War II, the military loves an acronym. And during World War II, soldiers started using the phrase snafu. It stands for situation normal, all f***ed up. And it just was a way of saying, like, yep, it's normal, everything sucks, but that's just kind of the way it always is. And it's come to mean now, just in modern parlance, a disaster or a terrible situation.
Perfect. This next question comes to us from Mark, who says, confession, I ditched my wife on our 2-year anniversary to be here.
Sorry, Mark. Mark's wife or our partner.
Mark wants to know, how long did it take to write the book, and are we getting a snafu too?
The book's been in process for about 1.5 years. And I will say, like, even though it's printed here and it's on shelves for sale, it is not done. I can't. I'm so writing a book is so exhilarating and frustrating because it's just, especially a book of this density, it's never exactly what you want. But anyway, what was the second part of the question?
The second part was, are we getting a snafu too? He's already done with this. He wants the next one.
Wow. All right. I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I think this book is organized in chapters that by decade, that starting in the 1950s, 60s, all the way through to the present. That's a pretty arbitrary way to divide up snafus. I feel like you can do all kinds of different things. You can do sports snafus. You can do medieval snafus, or I hope there's lots of books to come.
Well, and on that, or in that vein, is there a current snafu you would like to explore?
Well, we were just saying that we're literally swimming in a sea of snafu. But one that I think might, if it's not too destructive, which only time will tell, but I do feel like Doge is going to be that's going to be something we look back on and just be like, oh my God, like, what were we thinking?
Can you share any snafus that didn't make it into the book?
The ones that didn't make it into the book were generally the ones that you know about. So like the Titanic, the Donner Party, the Ernest Shackleton is a famous explorer. He had a great snafu in Antarctica, but that also is pretty well known. But that one is probably going to make it into season 4 of the podcast, I'm happy to say. Yeah.
Excellent. This person wants to know, how hard was it to keep a straight face in The Hangover?
So hard, and I mean, I would say literally impossible. Yeah. Which is to say, I laughed a ton. I ruined it so many takes, and that's stuff you'll never see.
That's great. This next one, the handwriting suggests to me that perhaps was written by a younger member of the audience.
Great.
And they would
the dog?
might be very good handwriting for a dog, if so. And they ask, how is it fun to be in those kind of movies like the original Hangover?
It's the funnest thing in the world. And it's the reason I wanted to do that as a job. When I watched Saturday Night Live as an 8-year-old kid, I didn't get the jokes, but I could tell that Eddie Murphy was having the most fun of anyone I had ever seen. And that's what I was like, that's what I want to do.
For sure. I love this question. What would be Andy Bernard's favorite snafu?
That's an interesting question. Let's see. Andy Bernard's favorite snafu. I feel like Andy's really tortured by snafus. Like they haunt him, and he's constantly kind of making disasters around himself, and then being haunted by them. I can't speculate. I'd have to sit down with the Office writers and really hash that one out. I'm sorry to cop out on that.
I think this wins for the most specific question of the evening. In addition to TV, films, podcasts, and books, have you considered strategy games online as another path to bringing stories about history alive?
No.
No. There you go. That's good. All right. Perfect.
I don't know what that is exactly. So there's an easy answer.
I pray you never find out. This person would like to know any recommendation for your top 3 movies of all time.
Boy, that's awesome. Awesome question.
Yeah.
I can't, it's so hard because you can't, in a different moment, I would be thinking of different movies, but a few jump to the top. Definitely in my top 10, I would say, would be Apocalypse Now. I found that movie so powerful and incredible, especially the director's cut.
Yeah.
The Redux, if you will. Apocalypse Now Redux.
Also, the filming of that one said to be major snafu.
Oh, huge snafu.
Yeah.
There's a whole documentary about that
Yeah.
called Hearts of Darkness, directed by Francis Ford Coppola's wife. It is so cool. Definitely watch that movie too. Raising Arizona is a movie that had a huge impact on me as a kid. And I just was like, yes, this is so strange and wonderful. Midnight Run with Charles Grodin and De Niro. Barton Fink is another Coen Brothers movie that I loved. Gosh. Vacation, the original Vacation.
Yes.
Very huge impact on my entire life.
Is there any comedy right now that you're excited about? Stuff that makes you laugh?
I just on the airplane watched You Are Cordially Invited, which is the Will Ferrell, Reese Witherspoon movie, where they accidentally book their weddings at the same location at the same time. And it's a big snafu. And it's also quite poignant, and it's kind of tonally all over the place, but I was like dying. I mean, things are always better on airplanes. I was dying laughing and then like welling up because it's about a dad planning a wedding for his daughter. And I was like, oh my God, one day I will never let her leave.
It's such a powerful experience to like cry on a plane watching a movie. Mm-hmm. It happened to me. I was watching Richard Linklater's Boyhood on the movie.
Ooh, wow.
Why would I make that choice? I'm a mess in that scene.
You know what made me full ugly cry on an airplane was Coco, the Pixar movie.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I literally saw the tile on the little screen and I was like, that looks colorful. I'm bored. And watched the whole thing. I was riveted the whole time and just sobbed, like heaving sobs at the end of that movie.
They should put a warning label on some of those Pixar movies.
Oh, also I remember Akilah and the Bee. Do you know that movie?
I haven't seen it.
It's a kid who wins a spelling bee, and like, again, it's something about airplanes.
Yeah.
Sobbing.
Why did you cry at the Spelling Bee movie?
Cause she won.
Okay.
She worked so hard, and it all paid off.
This person would like to know, what is your research process like?
So, in starting the podcast, we have my company, Pacific Electric, engaged with 2 partners. One was Film Nation Entertainment, and they had sort of a newish podcast division, and the other is a company called Gilded Audio that is a sort of a podcast production company, and that partnership led to sort of the filling out of a crew of researchers, and they're phenomenal, and I just cannot, like, I owe them so much, both in the podcast and in the book, just pulling together so much. I am thankfully able to stay like relatively high altitude. I'm not getting the primary sources, but I'm digging through everything. But it's those guys that are like finding great stuff.
Yeah. I've been thinking about it for an hour, and I still don't really understand the Acoustic Kitty plan. Like, there had to have been an easier way of getting a microphone anywhere.
Well, so also in the book is a similar story about when the CIA tried to like put little backpacks on pigeons with cameras in them and train the pigeons to go fly over, like, surveillance targets, and that was another disaster.
Should we have a CIA?
I mean, it's a good question. It's a valid question, truly.
I don't know. At the same time, we have been talking about, well, if you're not failing enough, maybe you're not trying hard enough. So, maybe we could see those experiments in that context.
I guess, yeah. Maybe those are the stumbles before the great successes.
Yeah. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
This may be our final question for the evening. I really enjoyed this one. This person signed the message Spy Cat and then drew a cat, and it's pretty good.
By the way, great questions all around.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Give yourselves a round of applause. Spy Cat wants to know, a 2,000-year-old scroll authored by an Epicurean Greek philosopher was recently unearthed at Herculaneum, a survivor of the Mount Vesuvius eruption. Do you hope Snafu will be similarly recovered in 2 millennia after a comparable cataclysmic event?
Yeah, of course. Of course I do. I don't know how it'll be. It all lives as, well, the book, there's hard copies of that, but the podcast, like, it's data.
Yeah.
How is that going to be recovered?
We do have a problem with how are we going to preserve all the digital media,
Yeah.
and then can the computers of the future read the media of
Yeah,
today?
I can't even open like papers I wrote in college on my Mac, and I'm like, oh, I remember that. What is that paleontology paper? I kind of want to read it. Can't open it. It's like first of all, it's on a floppy disk.
Oh,
and
floppy
then
disk.
And
yeah.
then it's and then it's WordPerfect or some other jank. So yeah, I don't know how the podcast is going to make it, but
that sounds like.
we'll etch it into a titanium platter like the space thing.
Yep, exactly.
What was it? The Voyager. Yeah.
Like the Voyager, exactly. Well, this has been hugely enjoyable for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank Ed Helms. And
give it up for Casey Newton, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. I'm now panicking because I know they wanted me to say something at the end, but I forgot to add it to my remarks. Thanks, everybody.